neutralization was so good with, fill in the blank vaccine compared to fill in the blank vaccine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you got to keep in mind that Moderna's dose is about 3 times Pfizer's dose. So, the problem with newts is that they're measuring a very artificial outcome, and there are multiple ways to do it. You can use pseudovirus, you can use live virus. The live virus is preferred. And
what I saw was pseudovirus. It was pseudovirus.
Yeah, what you're measuring in cell culture may or may not be predictive of protection, and in many cases, it's not. In many other viral vaccine contexts, we use hemagglutinin inhibition for influenza as a surrogate. But for most vaccines, neutralization titers aren't predictive. And now we learn that for many of the monoclonals, they're not predictive, which, as I mentioned, has been a huge paradox. There was a major program launched as a consequence of this that was run out of the La Jolla Institute of Allergy and Immunology, a major international collaboration, hundreds of millions of dollars spent, where they compared lots and lots of different monoclonals globally in a variety of different systems. Those data haven't been published yet, but I've seen them presented. They're mind-boggling. They've mapped the functional domain. So this has to do with functional inhibition as opposed to just neutralization. So this has to do with, if you add the antibody, does it change the outcome in an animal model? And that's kind of the only thing that's even close to predictive. And it turns out that a lot of the predictions made by the neutralization assays don't hold up. And furthermore, in this case, it's lovely, just elegant work. They've defined 7 different domains on spike in the receptor binding domain region and defined which of those are complementary, so that they can say, well, if we take an antibody that's against this domain plus one that's against this domain, then we'll get an additive or synergistic response. And so this is now what's guiding the next generation of monoclonal cocktails. But the assumption that the neutralization assays are predictive for outcomes here is a scientific fallacy, and you really got to watch it. There was a lot of hype put out about that early on. One of the things that kind of shows this is that the neutralization titers come up really fast, as do the T cell CTL titers. Like you can detect neutralization activity, antibody activity in natural infection or after vaccination at 14 days. That's a boost response. And so the question is, what is it boosting? Well, it's boosting the memory cells from your prior circulating coronavirus infections. And so you're able to get neutralizing titers as scored by pseudovirus or live virus assay at 14 days after either vaccination or natural infection, because what you're boosting is the memory T and memory B responses from prior coronavirus. And those are sufficiently cross-reactive to score as positive in a NUT assay, or as in a CTL assay, or a interferon gamma ELISpot assay. So this in the vaccinology space, I don't know what your background is, but this is my world, and we always say, mice lie, monkeys mislead, and the only thing that proves efficacy in humans is efficacy in humans. And there's just been so many examples of that. I used to be a primate center investigator. I cut my teeth on the early days in AIDS. There are so many artifacts in this space that even in the natural challenge, this is why Bob Redfield got kicked out of the Army, former CDC director, was because he hyped a bunch of conclusions about AIDS vaccine efficacy that turned out to be totally artifactual, that the protection was being afforded by an HLA molecule that was on the killed vaccine and also on the challenge virus, and it wasn't actually an AIDS protection. That's why he got booted out of the Army. That's historic stuff. So we really got to watch these things, and I caution you to not put too much into your interpretation of news.
Right. I just kind of viewed it as not definitive, but just a data point of a mosaic.
Yeah, good way to think about it. But it's become, sorry about the shaking on my platform here. it's really, I think that the snoot data have, whether it's the pseudovirus or the wild, they're a necessary predicate to get clearance to move forward with the vaccine into humans. So that's a lot of why they're being done.
And comparison between vaccines to kind of say who's the best one.
Yeah,
it's like a competitor, you know. Yeah,
they shouldn't be used like that. Was, I really objected when that was going on, because it was so misleading, and it was, they're not allowed to market these products, right? None of them are licensed, and so they do all kind of surreptitious methods to try to establish their competitive position without actually marketing. And so that's why you see the pictures of young Sally getting her jab, and the vial is prominently labeled Moderna, and it's in CNN or whatever. It's all surreptitious marketing. Right. But a lot of that. So that's just my caution about overdependency on newts. Is newts have turned out to be majorly misleading, and probably caused a lot of good monoclonal antibodies to be thrown in the trash inappropriately. Surprisingly, if I can continue going on that thread, this work doing the mapping shows that if you think of I've got two spike RBDs displayed with my two hands. Unfortunately, I don't have three hands. So it's a genetic defect that I have. But if you think of the cup like two catcher's gloves, right? And the assumption has been it's this internal surface on the RBD that you want to have your antibodies directed against. That turns out to be false. So the whole business about locking the RBD into the open conformation, because these things, they're moving around like crazy. They flip upside down and everything. The RBD is very fluid. Receptor binding domain is what we're talking about of the spike protein. It turns out that the really active targets, when they did this detailed monoclonal mapping, are at the edges and at the junctions. So antibody bridging between two spike subunits. It's not in the internal binding pocket. Those are not effective targets, and yet they score as neutralizing. So good to know. Sorry about that digression.
No. That's good. So let's pivot to a different topic here. So what's your take about the individuals that were advising Trump and now advising Biden? The ones like Fauci and Birx and Redfield, they all have a similar background, and that background is HIV research. I find that very odd when it's supposedly a beta coronavirus. So what's your take on this?
So you're basically touching on the nature of power in DC HHS politics. It's along those same lines. Apparently the lead candidate for becoming director of the FDA is Rahm Emanuel's brother. Mm-hmm. DC is a funny place. I don't know where you're located, but I kind of specialize.
I'm in New York City.
Yeah. So I was just out on the West Coast and had for this presentation that I mentioned at the Liberty Forum, and I had dinner with a guy who's a very senior pharmacologist, UVA and now Stanford, Ray Schnazi buddy, Gilead veteran, and we were talking about things, and he has some familiarity with Dr. Fauci, and he started telling me about the way he thought things were, and my wife reprimanded me. I just looked at him. I said, sometimes when I come out west, I want to hug my friends when I hear this stuff, because they have so little understanding of the way DC works, and the power relationships that exist there. So Um, the way so I wouldn't lump Tony and Bob in the same bucket. Um, Bob Redfield is more of a Bob Gallo buddy, and Bob Gallo and Tony Fauci are cats and dogs. They Tony got Bob kicked out of NCI, and Redfield has worked for Gallo for years and years, ever since he got kicked out of the Army. So the way Bob and Debbie came in to that position was that you'll recall that the Trump administration had some strong bias towards the fundamentalist religious community. And there's a mega donor who was one of the main advocates for the African AIDS initiative that came up under Bush too, and was one of his major achievements. That guy and his wife are, let's say, fundamentalist, Christian fundamentalists, and I know first person that they were the ones that recommended both Birx and Bob. So that's how that happened. It was through advocacy from a well-connected large donor who is a fundamentalist. It's not generally known that, but I used to live down by Atlanta. I've been to the CDC way too many times. I was down there working on a cell-based flu project for a company called Solvay, a large BARDA contract, $300 million. There are a ton of creationists that work at the CDC, and a lot of the thinking that one has about these relationships, there are power blocks that are constantly jockeying for power and position in the world of DC. Tony is he's got its own power base, and it's really quite profound. He's got a larger budget than the CDC does that he controls. And the way he works, that he is just super popular on the Hill, no matter which side of the street you're on, Democratic or Republican, Senate or House. He is really, really popular. And the way that that's reinforced is that all funding that comes out of NIAID, and really now all of NIH, is tracked by congressional district. And they give reports to all the congressional districts about who's getting how much money. And Tony actively allocates funding for new programs like the Centers for Biodefense Excellence, based on basically his political favors. So it's like pork barrel turned upside down. This is a strategy that was also pioneered by John Murtha back before he passed away, when he was chairman of Defense Appropriations in the House, where they set up an organization, a nonprofit called the Henry Jackson Foundation for Military Medicine. And the way I used to work with them, so this is how I kind of learned how these things work. And you got to spend time in DC to really figure out what the wiring is. And that's kind of a lot of what I do, is I know enough about how the wiring works that I'm able to intercede and get things done in a way that normally it's hard to get stuff done because the bureaucracy is so thick and deep. So the way that Murtha pioneered it was that, so this is kind of a microcosm of how a lot of NIH works now, is Congress appropriates for a given topic area relating to military medicine, ostensibly, broadly written, to Henry Jackson. This is now more diluted. It's not as transparent as it once was when Murtha was there. So allocate money to Henry Jackson. That money then gets washed through a pseudo peer review committee, often run by the Uniformed Services University Health Sciences. Henry Jackson takes a nick, USUS takes a nick, and then what dribbles down gets allocated to the program that the congressional appropriator originally wanted it allocated to. But it all gets kind of cleaned and washed in this way so that it's not really transparently just a directed appropriation. And when you do this, the thing that's really works great in this model for Dr. Fauci and others, that if, Tony is one of the most powerful people in the United States government, and really in world health.
Mm-hmm.
He controls a huge budget. University presidents, do what Tony says to do, or they lose their indirects. He's enormously powerful. But so it's that's kind of how the things go.
And he waived that power when they were writing the paper in Nature about the approximate origins of the coronavirus. And he was waving it in Congress, saying, "Well, this proves what I'm saying." Yeah, but he was the one.
Power is profound, and now he's fully allied with Gates. So your listenership may not be aware that there's a foundation for the CDC and a foundation for the NIH. These are nonprofits that are set up because normally it's disallowed. I can't volunteer for the government. You can't volunteer for the government. You can't give money to the government except through your taxes. But you can't, if you're Zuckerberg, you can't say, I'm going to write $100 million check to the U.S. government. Please don't attack me and break up Facebook. Right? Here's $100 million. They can't do that. So those are the rules. And so what's been done to circumvent that is to set up these nonprofit foundations to support the CDC or the NIH. And then those work in close cooperation. So for instance, all the active trials, these are the drug and vaccine trials that were run by NIH. That's one of the branches that they use. That's all managed by the Foundation for NIH and has both federal money intermingled with donated money from the likes of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So that's how that works. Same with the CDC. How do I know this? Because I've been involved in writing some of those contracts and setting up those deals. Back, for instance, when I was working for one of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation companies called Aris Global TV Vaccine Foundation. So this is, so Birx and Bob came in because of a high net worth donor advocating for them for those positions. That's how they got there. Tony is a whole separate deal.
Well, the rumor was that there were several individuals trying to kick him out back when George Bush Sr. was president.
People have tried to get him out for the last three administrations.
Right.
He's like Herbert Hoover, right? He knows where all the bodies are buried.
Uh-huh. Well, that is a perfect segue into what I wanted to get to here.
I just let me underscore.
Yeah.
There's what's his name? The guy from Baylor, Peter Hotez, right? I don't know if you saw Peter Hotez's piece in PLOS. It's not accepted yet. I think it's pending review or it's provisionally accepted. He put out an op-ed in which he advocates that it become criminal to criticize Tony Fauci. Flat out.
Yeah, see, this is the problem is that we're not having real dialogue about the science. Science is about asking questions and saying, how do we know that? Questioning what we know.
So
they're circumventing science.
Yeah. It's worse than that. So being at the tip of the spear as I am, in speaking out, right? Mm-hmm. I've had 5 different attack pieces written by a company called Logically, which set itself up as a fact checker organization in the UK and is funded by Wellcome Trust and Facebook and Zuckerberg. And they're just flat out doing character assassination. But as if that wasn't good enough, I just had one drop from The Atlantic today that is very transparently character assassination. and again is funded by Zuckerberg Chan and Robert Wood Johnson. This is, you can't, not only can you not say anything, right? You can lose your license, right? This is the new reality. Is
Right.
here in the United States. It was first done in France and Spain, and then in Great Britain. In Great Britain, you can lose your license for even talking about early treatment. Okay, that merits loss of license to practice medicine. And now here in the States, you can lose your license to practice medicine for promoting misinformation as defined as anything that is contrary to what official WHO and CDC party line is.
Right, exactly. And see, and there's so many, I think there's a lot of data that's coming out that proves that many edicts that were coming from the CDC were just flat out wrong. But if you question them, you're silenced, or you lose your license, or even worse, you know, the character assassination stuff.
There's a classic one in that somebody pointed out to me the other day that I posted on Twitter and spoke about just a couple days ago, where the WHO has modified its definition of herd immunity. The original version of herd immunity, right? I mean, herd immunity, right? Herd immunity has been in the textbooks for decades, right? And the original version of it was aligned with what we were taught, you know, what one is taught as an epidemiologist. And the new version only speaks about herd immunity as something that can be achieved through vaccination.
It's totally ridiculous, because obviously we had viral infections before modern medicine, you know, and that there was herd immunity established, during the Black Plague.
This is the greatest propaganda effort in the history of man.
But the thing is why? You get to the question, why is this happening? Why is there such a gigantic push for, quote, everyone, even ones that have contracted SARS-CoV-2 already, to get vaccinated, and that they're putting us on the track of constant dose?
Yeah, bedevils all of us. There's a guy that I've cross-posted on my Twitter account, who's an expert in propaganda, and I'm just scanning to see if I can get the right name, because I want to cite him. Bruce Patterson. I think that's the right name. Let me make sure just a sec.
He sounds familiar.
No, I'm sorry. Piers Robinson. Piers Robinson is a bona fide academic propaganda expert. Okay, so he follows this down the rabbit hole. It's an Asia Pacific article, and I can't go there, where he goes, but he speaks about the breadth and depth of this propaganda operation globally, and he ends up attributing it to longer term strategic interests of the World Economic Forum. I explicitly usually start off my talks by saying, number one, I don't want to talk about graphene oxide, and I don't want to talk about the World Economic Forum, okay? But, it gets increasingly hard not to go there in terms of these theories to account for what seems otherwise inexplicable, and it doesn't align with public health. I recommend to you and to your listenership, and there's many that are derisive about the Epoch Times, but they're, I think, fourth or fifth largest publication in terms of news worldwide right now. Mm-hmm. And yes, they were founded by Falun Gong that got booted out of China, and so they're hypersensitive to Chinese propaganda issues. That's one of their core things, and you just gotta, every publication has got its angle. So there's Martin Kulldorff is a full professor of epidemiology at Harvard, and I recommend to your viewership his recent interview in American Thought Leaders titled "Dangers of Vaccine Mandates." because my thinking is very much aligned with his on what's going on here. We are profoundly damaging public trust in the public health enterprise.
Is he coming through HB? Is he coming from HLS, the Harvard Law School, or
no?
Which school is he coming through?
I think he's in Harvard Med.
Okay, all right.
He's
HMS.
Swedish.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he's Swedish, by the way. So his position is basically the position that the Swedish government has taken, which is that the one that I'm advocating and that I put out in, it's the best we could get in the Washington Times 2 weeks ago with Peter Navarro, which is that we need to focus our vaccination efforts on those that are truly at high risk, not broadly deployed across the entire population, because these vaccines do have risks.
Mm-hmm. And also have these therapeutic treatments out there as you know.
So focus the vaccines on those at highest risk. Deploy the therapies and make sure that there's testing available so that those therapies can be implemented as soon as possible after the infection event. And that we stop universal vaccination. Now, this is now I'm bridging into more the thinking of Geert Vandenbosch. This continued emphasis on universal vaccination will drive. So you're sophisticated enough. Let me just walk it back a minute. Universal vaccination will tune our immune responses, including our memory cell populations, to specific epitopes present in spike, because all the vaccines basically are relying on spike. Mm-hmm. And we now know that those adaptive immune responses include NK cells. So it's not just T and B, it's also what we think of as innate immunity classically. All have an adaptive component. So we're tuning all of those to a specific antigen. And in deploying this universally, I guarantee what we will see and what we're already seeing is the increasing precision of vaccine escape mutants. We are likely to have convergence on a dominant mutated virus that will escape immune surveillance against those key epitopes on spike that we've been driving everybody's immune response towards. And once that virus achieves that evolutionary objective, all of our vaccines employing this kind of strategy will become completely irrelevant.
Mm-hmm. But then take it one step further. Once you get to that point, all right, you take it one step further, then my thinking is that, well, there's going to be natural infection, and through that, you're eventually, how long, I don't know, but eventually you're going to be building natural infection antibodies in the population for these different variants, and you're going to start boxing it in.
It's probably more controlled by the CTL and other T effector populations than it is by antibodies. But in any case, that's a inside vaccinology argument. I concur. So fascinatingly, this in the CDC slide deck that was leaked to the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago, the CDC asserts that natural immunity only lasts for about 6 months also. That's not aligned with all of the published data that I'm aware of. So it's much more likely that natural immunity is certainly broader and longer lived than vaccine-induced immunity. So that the durability of natural immune responses is better, and the breadth of response, because it's a multi-epitope, multi-antigen target, is broader. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a paper out there from a guy that I once worked for that that asserts that this is not true, that the spike vaccine elicited antibodies are much broader than those elicited by the virus itself. I think that is not standing the test of time. I think that most are finding what you're concluding, and it is that's another one of these things that's just bizarre. Is they don't include those that have recovered from natural infection in their calculations of the fraction of the population that has. They don't officially include that as a fraction of the population that now has immunity to the virus. But in the CDC leaked deck, they absolutely do include that. And they have two different scenarios. I think it's about 30% of the population has already been infected versus 4 or 5% is the two scenarios. Those are in the graphs in which they're calculating the effect of optimal mask use and up to 100% vaccine coverage on Delta spread. And they conclude that there is no way that we can stop the spread of Delta, even if there's perfect mask utilization and 100% vaccine uptake, because these are leaky vaccines.
Right. We're going to have this for a while. I mean, many years.
Including Martin Kulldorff, and I've been saying it for months. We're going to live with this the rest of our lives.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's definitely going to be there's different phases of this. There's the pandemic phase, what we'll call the crisis, and then there's the endemic phase. We're still in the pandemic phase, and I think that the pandemic phase is 2 years out, farther out, before we can even make the delineation in developed nations that we are moving into the endemic phase. And then that endemic phase can be put into multiple phases. At the beginning of the endemic phase, you're going to have more variants.
Not to make it sound like you should just all go out and jump off a cliff or commit suicide, because you're going to be under this horrible situation for the rest of your lives. The natural, as you know, the natural tendency of viruses when they cross species and move into a new population is to be, once they adapt to the new host, they're often highly pathogenic. And over time that becomes attenuated in a ratcheting fashion, because it's not in the evolutionary best interest of the virus to have the host lying in bed sick or dead, because the virus can't spread then. So the selective pressure is for a highly infectious, low pathogenicity virus. Now, what happens between here and there? Gert van den Bosch argues that the universal vaccination is going to drive us into a position where we're going to have increasingly lethal viruses as a consequence of the vaccine. I don't know. I
think it's going to be S-curved. I think it's going to be S-curved. At the very beginning of this, I agree with Bosch. But then what it does is our system starts to box these variants in, and you won't have this runaway effect that he's talking about. Another thing that I think Bosch is wrong with is that my understanding is that he's saying that the innate immune system is downregulated, not just specifically to SARS-CoV-2. So that would mean that you would have parasitic, bacterial, and fungal infections rampant for individuals that have taken vaccines. That's not the case.
And the black fungus in India, so not necessarily with vaccines, but with the infection. So, as you know, the T helper, Tregs are really hit hard with the natural infection, and there are multiple functional proteins in pathways in the virus itself, both in full-length proteins and cleaved products, including spike itself, which activates NF-kappa B and flips on COX-2, by the way, which is something I'm kind of sensitive to because of our celecoxib work. That's part of why we do it. There's two different pathways that the virus uses to flip on COX-2, which is why we use celecoxib as part of our protocol. But the virus, as most viruses do, is actively manipulating our immune response in order to enhance its reproductive potential. And I I I hope he's wrong, but the cytometry suggests that um, in the natural infection, at least, there's profound effects. The there is this odd, the data coming out now. I'm hearing about this hyperactivated atypical monocyte fraction that persists and has spike protein in the cytoplasm that persists for 6 months or more, both after vaccination in some cases and after infection, that is being tracked as attributable to long COVID and the post-vaccination syndrome. So I think we're also a long way from understanding these inflammatory cascades, and as a personal sufferer of long COVID, that has now, and by the way, one of the way apparently there's data suggesting that ivermectin helps clear this population for whatever reason and mechanism. All I know is somebody with long COVID who also had the post-vaccine syndrome after Moderna, and I got grade 3 hypertension and really markedly exacerbated cough and other symptoms. 3-day course of ivermectin, I feel better than I've felt in months. So there's something going on there. I think I might have mentioned that earlier. Right. So I don't know what's going on with these post-infection or post-vaccination inflammatory phenotypes, but it's something. So is Gert right or wrong? Is it so profound that we will see these other adventitious agents, which many attribute to that kind of a problem is one thesis for why the 1918 outbreak was so bad. It wasn't just the flu virus that got you, it was the bacterial superinfection that knocked you out really quick. That was also epidemic. I don't know. I mean, I hope Gert's wrong about a lot of this stuff, but his logic about the core of viral evolution, I don't see how it makes sense to blindly carry forward with universal vaccination when we don't have enough vaccine for everybody, when the Swedish data is so compelling. They're hitting down, they hit 0 deaths like a week ago, and it's still just tiny little amounts of death by doing this strategy of combination of natural infection, drug support to the extent that it's possible, and vaccination of the high-risk individuals. Why wouldn't we do this? It's like it makes sense.
Exactly. But it's a 3-pronged approach. I agree with you.
That's what we've been trying to advocate with Peter and others. And the thanks I get is character assassination by the Atlantic.
Well, what I found very interesting with Peter was that when he was talking with Steve Bannon on his show, he was talking about in the Situation Room when he was with Trump, and they were talking about policy of shutting down the airlines. Fauci was very passive aggressive, and you can kind of almost see it when he was being grilled by Rand Paul during the Senate hearings, and it was Birx and Fauci that basically stated, according to Peter, that, well, you're not going to be able to stop the infection. Just let the airlines stay open and don't shut down. This is early. This is like very, very early in February. Yeah. And just let it go. Just let it be. So it's just like he's flip flopped, and there's this. There needs to be I've been trying to promote this idea that we need to get to the bottom of the funding mechanism, how this was all started, and that the ones that the ones that perpetrated this whole thing needs to be possibly on trial for crimes against humanity. I mean, I view this as such an existential threat to the human existence.
There's no question. I remind you that Mr. Biden a couple of months ago announced that we were going to get to the bottom of this lab leak hypothesis right away. And he was going to direct all the all the three-letter agencies to give him reports. And we haven't heard a peep out of him.
Right, exactly. Well, the thing is the CCP owns a lot of corporations in the United States. There's a lot of graft that's going back and forth, between the United States and China. The microcosm is just the whole Hunter Biden, fiasco with the hedge fund, but the investment fund. But what I'm seeing here is that we need to have a much more, a bigger push out there in the United States to really investigate Fauci and his funding.
How are you
like, for example,
they control all the media.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. Well, we're trying to do it on these smaller, channels, and
that's why.
But yeah, you're right.
My wife and I, before as this all kicked off, and I was sucked into this vortex of media
it's a vortex.
Podcasts. Yeah. Jill and I, because I'd already tangled with CNN a couple times during this outbreak, particularly over Kevin Tracy and kind of ripping me off for credit with famotidine, and then them promoting Katie Carrico for doing, taking credit for my own work. And so we kind of looked at each other and said, okay, what are we going to do? And I said, we don't have any other alternative other than to go to new media and alt media. Mm-hmm. And so we fired up my Twitter account, and then when the Brett Weinstein thing hit, it just went nuclear. It just went over the top. It's now at pushing 230,000. Mm-hmm. And I said, let's go podcasts.
It's a good strategy.
They're the new pirate radio. They are.
Right.
This is pirate radio. What we're doing here. If you watch that movie, and the irony is, it was the BBC was the censors there, right? And it's the BBC that's running the Trusted News Initiative that's driving all of this.
Mm-hmm. Another element that I see, not just the Fauci element of the funding mechanism, but there seems to be this common theme, all right, and that is HIV. All right, there's this HIV homology for the jump to the human ACE2 receptor by Batwoman with her paper that she published in 2008 that seemed to jumpstart this whole thing, and her work with Barrick. But then even on Barrick's CV, who works at Chapel Hill, he was working with Sims, and we're developing coronavirus vector vaccines for influenza and, drum roll, HIV. See, at the same time, this is between 2008 to about 2013. There is something nefarious going on here, Dr. Malone. That there's no doubt about it. And it's coming right out of Chapel Hill, out of Barrick's lab. And I am very suspicious. I'm very suspicious about that coronavirus vaccine vector coming right out of Barrick's group.
So almost every virologist in the United States that is hunting federal money, which is what you have to constantly do these days. It's the nature of the beast. Mm-hmm. Is everybody, they don't fund stuff like they used to. They don't fund people. They fund applications. They don't fund technology platforms. They fund applications. So if you want to do fundamental virology, you've got to find some way to support yourself by selling some angle. And the easiest angle, because that's where all the money is application of your favorite virus as a vector for producing an HIV vaccine.
I'll take it one step further, Dr. Malone, and maybe because of your position, you can't answer this, and that's okay. I understand and appreciate what you can share. But my take on this is that there was a weapons program that was being developed in the United States in conjunction with China, and that what Bannon says is what Bannon says about the CCP virus. It's a USA CCP virus, and this is coming right out of DOD.
So, well, it's coming out of the people that I work with, DITRA. Gain of function research is considered dual purpose.
Right.
And dual purpose is classified. It's black money. As I mentioned on Reiner's German program, Fulmich, I think is his last name. I'm not sure I got it pronounced correctly. There's an odd thing in the biowarfare treaty that we've signed, and that is that it only covers lethal agents. It doesn't cover incapacitating agents. And so there is a, depending on this is a, is the glass half full or glass half empty kind of a thing. It depends on which way you're looking at it. Gain of function research is either anticipating the weaponization that the bad guys might be doing so that we can prepare countermeasures against it. Mm-hmm. But that's why it's dual function. The other side is it's enabling us to have insight into things that we could do should we so want to do. Exactly. And it happens to be that the people that I deal with, all know that they're allowed to, by the treaty, there is a hole in the treaty, and it's for agents which are incapacitating.
Mm-hmm. And hence the forced vaccine program, because it may be a security issue, and they're trying to get the individuals vaccinated
It's absolutely a national security issue. But does it go from A to B? That's the whole, why this insane emphasis on forced vaccinations, universal forced vaccinations.
Well, I think what's going to happen is that I think where I'm at right now in my thinking is that there's going to be there was this article that came out from the CDC saying, well, they were going to get out of the RT-PCR business. Well, there's like 380 different vendors for the RT-PCR and the antigen testing. All right. But they were saying that they would prefer that individuals start testing with multiplexing for influenza and SARS-CoV-2. All right. I think what is going on here is that you're going to start seeing cases that are influenza positive and SARS-CoV-2 positive. And that is going to start, in my mind, showing that this is tied to the program that was coming out of Barrick's lab. Because I believe that there is what I call the 5 cocktail. The 3 cocktail is what was released. And that 3 cocktail is the bat SARS, the SARS with the HIV homology that gives you the human ACE2 jump, the gain of function. I hate the word gain of function. For the layman out there, it's HIV homology, because the HIV homology wasn't there, it wouldn't be gain of function. So I spin it as HIV homology. So it just sets in the mind of the average to understand what's really going on here. In Barrick's lab, he was tinkering around with beta coronaviruses to present H protein and more functional glycoprotein 120 and glycoprotein 41. That means that for the military, U.S. military, that they have a direct target where you infect pulmonary into the battlefield. It manifests like we would call SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 disease. It gets into the system and it eventually attacks the CD4 cells. They, I think, had a plan to drop this in the Middle East. And this was planned in around probably 2013, 2014. And there was a paper that came out from Barrick and Shee that stated that there was going to be the possibility of an emergent MERS. Well, MERS is a very close cousin to SARS, right? And SARS-CoV-2, right? So I think they were laying the foundation for a weapon drop in the Middle East, and that they had to have the antidote for our soldiers. Because I think what's happening is that for urban warfare, the attrition is just too high, and that it's better to come up with a system that we can drop it. It weakens the population, your enemy's population, over, let's say, a 20-day period. They get sick. Your soldiers are inoculated by some sort of vaccine, maybe the nanoferritin, and, to whatever agent they dropped, and then they go and sweep. I think that was what the DOD or the Defense Department or whatever department it is in with the Pentagon was dreaming up.
I talk about, so I use the metaphor conspiracy Legos. There's a bunch of these compartments of information that you can assemble in a whole bunch of different ways. And I try to live in the world of facts that I know. And also, to the extent that I speculate, I try to take the frame of reference. The best metaphor I have is of a stockbroker. You're constantly looking for black swans, leading indicators, and doing risk mitigation. This is not the way that the CDC and the WHO think. They only operate based on proven data, which makes them always at least 6 months behind the curve. So it's a big difference. And so that's that, if we're talking about leading indicators, potential black swan events, and risk mitigation, that's kind of as far out as I'm good with pushing the envelope. And I try to stay away from speculating about, cause and effect in the big schemes, whether it's this or the World Economic Forum agenda to depopulate or the Great Transition.
But when we do speculate these things.
However, the point of my colleagues are very aware that there's a hole in the biowarfare treaty that we've signed, which means that everybody else is aware of it too, that does not prohibit the use of incapacitating agents. And what you're describing is what you're verbalizing is the description of an incapacitating agent, and the best incapacitating agents are weaponizable for inhaled transmission.
Exactly, and that's why the DOD was their antennas went up when Dr. Shee proved in proof of concept in her 2008 paper that you could jump using HIV homology with the bat SARS and the SARS.
That assertion
into the ACE2
is above my classification grade. And if
I'll tell you right now, I'm telling you right now, it came all the way from that 2008 paper. I know that for a fact.
Okay, well, I can't go there. But I've said how far I can go.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate what wherever you can.
This does have characteristics. This does have characteristics of incapacitating agent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it opens up the larger question, which is the more important one. Not so much how they did it, all right, but what, as citizens in the United States, what can we do to stop this from happening? We're literally going to turn this world into a living hell if we don't stop and shine a light on the Pentagon and saying, you are developing a world where we're going to be constantly in crisis and wearing masks and needing vaccine, mandates and lockdowns. And this is turning the world into a living hell. We have to dial it back. See, what the problem is that after 9/11, these agencies, the Pentagon and the CIA and the FBI and the TSA and the NSA, there's institutionalization. It keeps on growing and growing and growing, and then they get hubris and they feel as though they can do whatever they want. And then you have a character like Fauci that, has his issues. And all of a sudden, now we're in lockdown, masks and vaccine mandates and vaccine passports to, until the cows come home. We have to shine a light on this and stop it. The Pentagon needs to stop.
I don't know how. So, forgive me. I'm feeling a little bruised lately.
I'm sorry.
I'm in the receiving end of the pushback. And there's a good chance that this will be weaponized against me, just as me speaking on Bannon's show was. The whole lead paragraph in the Atlantic Monthly attack piece was leading about what a nutcase Bannon is, and then making me guilt by association.
No, I don't think Bannon is not a nutcase. I don't think. I think that
incredibly. No, let me just say so on that point. In dealing with Steve Bannon, he is sharp as a tack, and he's got incredible.
Except he did admit while he was interviewing you that he got a D in biology, and I have to admit to everybody that's listening that I received an A. So there's the difference.
Fair enough. But you didn't work on Wall Street, and
well, I did manage a portfolio. No, I didn't work in the.
Okay.
I did not work in the White House.
And in Hollywood.
I did manage a portfolio.
Okay, good for you. So Bannon is an interesting character, and he's got a breadth of experience that I find kind of amazing, and it gives him some really. I find him an interesting guy intellectually. He's different. He does go down these conspiracy rabbit holes that I won't go down, but that doesn't mean that I don't find him interesting and worth listening to and talking to. But I talk to everybody. I like to say I live in a purple state in a red county, and I was born in the Central Coast of California. And grew up there. So I've got credentials as a flaming liberal, but that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy listening to, and interacting with Glenn Beck, or with Steve Bannon. That right. I live in a world where I want to learn from everybody.
Right. No, I think the way to get through this crisis is for us to talk. If we start going into our own echo chambers, we're never going to get out of this crisis.
Thank you.
Both sides. We have to talk this through. And because it's a civil liberty issue, it's a biological issue, it's an economic issue. I normally have longer hair. I had my hair cut. And I went to the barber today, and we were talking, and he was saying business is really bad. He's worried. He's worried that he has to, shut down his barbershop. And, this is in New York City. And he said in basically November, December, January, and February, he almost had zero business because everyone wanted to stay home because we had that big surge that was taking place. Sure. So he's living on the edge. He may lose his business. And there's a lot of places that are like this.
The economic and psychological and physical toil in damage here is profound. This again, I recommend, if you haven't listened to Martin Kulldorff's interview on American Thought Leaders, he's got a pretty good grasp of this, and it's kind of how he also talks about the impact on public health from other causes. You've got deferred diagnostics and management for female reproductive issues and cardiac disease and everything else. We've just the badness goes on and on and on, and it is hard to explain and account for what how this could come about. My personal bias is it's just a profound intersection of groupthink and incompetence, bolstered up. You used hubris as a term. I think that is absolutely appropriate. And I mean, Fauci's 80 years old. We got a gerontocracy here that is making all of the decisions.
It's true.
And
it's very true.
they're not big. They're just that's the other part. This is the part with when you started mentioning HIV and this intersection of all of these geriatrics. I mean, Redfield is no spring chicken.
Right.
Neither is Debbie.
Well, right, exactly.
Right. And I thought that's where you were going. Is these are all people that cut their teeth as scientists in the as leaders in the 80s. There's used to just to say the phrase that used to be used for this cohort at NIH was the yellow berets. Most of them came in on yellow berets because most of them came in on draft deferments. I mean, a lot of these folks got in there, got their hooks into the system as a way to escape the draft from the Vietnam War.
It's interesting.
That's why they're there.
That's right. Yeah.
And they kind of embedded themselves in being that I'm a farmer also, the metaphor of the tick comes to mind. But that's they're thoroughly embedded into this system. Look at Francis Collins. That guy is ancient. And this is not, and one of the things is I've watched Tony for a very long time. And I've watched his lieutenants grow up. Most of them have retired. One of the problems that we talk about in the world that I live in about Tony is that, once they wheel him out, and that's what's going to take. I mean, he's going to have to be on a slab before he leaves NIAID. Not saying that anyone should kill Tony Fauci. I'm not saying that. But when he finally is forced to leave, there is a vacuum. There's nobody to take his place. Normally, the way I've been trained is as a leader, one of your first obligations
build the bench.
is to train your successor.
Right.
And there ain't none. Cliff Lane is the closest thing, and Cliff Lane is basically Tony's henchman, and he's just as old. The ones that would make sense as potential replacements, because they don't draw that, when, just like I mentioned Rahm Emanuel's brother, I think Ezekiel is his name, being put up as the nominee for head of FDA. They don't draw from the bench of the United States. They draw from the bench of DC insiders. You've got to have been previously part of the system and risen within the system. And in the case of NIH and the NIAID, that means you pretty much you're beholden to Tony. So those of us that look, in on that, I just don't know where this goes from here. That's part of why I like working for DoD. DoD, they have to, the bad news is the colonels rotate every 3 years, 2 to 3 years. And so there's no continuity of leadership in any one programmatic area. But the good news is they don't build fiefdoms, and they get career advancement. I mean, colonel in the medical space is pretty much a terminal appointment unless you do something really good, and then you're out. So if you want to make brigadier, you got to knock it out of the park somehow. And so they have a lot of incentives to produce a product, to do something important, not just publish a paper. And the DoD is driven by the need to protect the warfighter. Mm-hmm. And that's their primary mission. And in the people that I deal with, I mean, we talk about it all the time. It is central to the logic and the words that we use is how do we protect the warfighter? And that we don't protect the warfighter by publishing in the New England Journal of Medicine.
Exactly.
So there's the warfighter by coming up with a compound, but or a vaccine that works or whatever. What happened after 9/11 and the anthrax attacks is that the DoD got blamed, Stephen Hatfield and all that stuff, DOD got blamed for the anthrax spores. Whether or not they deserve to be, still undetermined. Hatfield was absolved. But DOD got blamed. And so then there was the logic put forth, DOD is incompetent. They were responsible for this mess. Therefore, we should take away their budget and we should give it to the NIH or to HHS. And HHS should become responsible for producing all the biodefense products, except for the few selected ones that are necessary just to protect the warfighter and the associated platform technologies. And so DOD lost a huge part of its budget. Now, the person that was pushing that, the way I heard the story, and I was there, was none other than Dr. Fauci. And the DOD still remembers it. Trust me. Okay, they're like elephants. And right now, there's another major restructuring ongoing because BARDA got gutted. I don't know if you knew Rick Bright. I've known him for a long time. He got into a big fight with Bob Kadlec and Michael Callahan, and he went whistleblower and basically burned the house down of BARDA. And part of the criticism of Rick was, who was the director of BARDA at the time. BARDA is responsible. BARDA is the one that paid for the J&J. Rick wrote that contract. And then after that, and apparently the way I heard the story was Rick didn't check with Tony before he issued that contract. And that was a major faux pas. And so then Operation Warp Speed was set up. Navarro was driving that bus at the start.
Right.
I need to check with Navarro about that part of the story. But in any case, Rick got in a big fight, and there was a discussion about what to do with him because he wasn't doing the job at BARDA. And I was actually asked for my opinion. I suggested that he be put in charge of diagnostics because he'd done that previously at BARDA for Zika. And that's what they did. They gave him the position. They promoted him to being responsible for diagnostics for the entire country. And Rick basically said, hell no, I'm not going. And, the LA Times got a phone call, and one thing led to another, and his whistleblower complaint that apparently has now been settled financially in his favor. But in the meantime, BARDA got destroyed. And his disclosures were, financial corruption and other things that were going on there. And so now the question is, what do we do? Since BARDA is gutted, and OWS, Warp Speed, is given credit for the big success of Moderna. And so now there's a great big food fight over what it looks like in the future and where the money's going to go. And, to be determined. I think probably this infrastructure bill is going to have a lot of the capital that's going to drive that decision. But we're now up to the, current moment. There is a major power struggle over who's going to control all this and whether there's still going to be a role for D&D, and if so, what that role is.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I think that infrastructure bill is going to be restructuring this whole country, and it's totally different than what I was born into.
It
totally.
is.
It's
my wife. One of my wife's favorite things lately is this initiative that we have to have breathalyzers in our new cars. Her point is it just seems that they're just getting more and more focused on regulating individuals, mm-hmm. and not on regulating big business. That is what's
Well, I'll tell you, it's going to get to it's not in this bill, but maybe it's going to be in the reconciliation bill. But they're going to have toilets that analyze your feces to determine if you're expelling too much methane, and then they'll give you a cart, some sort of methane tax. Agree. I mean, they're going to get to a very granular level. My point is, they're going to get to a very granular level of trying to control your life.
That's kind of how it sounds, and it seems to be where it's going. And so you keep circling back to what can we do about it. This was one of my conclusions in the talk 2 days ago, as I was given the closing question, what do we do about it? And my comment was that with all the logic and all the facts, the best we can do is bend the curve a little bit, because they've got all these forces deployed to negate that. I mean, the attack pieces I get, not that it's all about me, but the attack pieces I get never challenge the logic. They never discuss the logic. It's all about character assassination. That's their approach, is character assassination, not examining the issues or the data or anything else. So that's how they play. They play dirty, and they really don't want to engage in rational discussion. That's and I think they know they can't win that argument. Fortunately, it's not just the United States; it's a whole global community, and the U.S. has been really effective, together with WHO, with enforcing this dominant narrative. But it's starting to crack. But so I was listening to one piece. Well, it was the gentleman that I mentioned earlier about the propaganda campaign. His comment was that he thinks they've overstepped with COVID, that the bubble around the COVID logic is too fragile, and it's going to fracture because they can't sustain their position in the face of some very simple logic and data. I mean, you can't dispute Delta, and even more, you're going to be not able to dispute Lambda. People that are vaccinated are being infected, and they are infecting other people. That's just, and so now they're in a position where they're trying to rephrase the narrative and say, well, we never said that it was 100% protective. We never said it was going to protect you. It's like this revisionist history is going, you can watch it going on in real time in the press with these placed articles. But my point is that logic will not get us there. Logic is a little bit of a blue pill, or a red pill, I'm sorry, in terms of getting people to open up a little bit, like my bioethics piece did. But for most of the people, they don't have a clue, and they just buy the party line and go about their business.
Well, the thing is, it's like this on the scientific pillar of this issue. I just don't think that the educational level in the United States is at par to really understand the details of.
Daryl is busy jumping up and down in agreement there. I'm noticing in his panel like I concluded my last podcast with them. Dear listener, please think. But my point is that even if so, I just don't find all this effort to put out clear, easily comprehended messaging and information so that people can make their own informed decisions. Just doesn't seem to be very effective at all.
I mean, to the point that I was making here, Fauci's doing the TikTok stuff. TikTok is kind of like millennial or Gen Z kind of thing, right? And he's talking with these Gen Z influencers. There's some thought that maybe some of these Gen Z are actually getting paid $1,000 per episode for this. I don't know if that's true or not. But Fauci's doing the rounds to try to get the young to think a certain way. There's a propaganda that's taking place to
Yes.
get vaccinated and all this. So when they do softball questions with Fauci, and that is, well, does the vaccine have a live virus and stuff like this? And I'm like going, you're 15 or 16 years old. You should know this in your high school education in science. I don't understand why you even have to ask that question. And it's just
So all I was trying to say is the only way that this is going to change is through political action. And I don't know at what point do we hit a actualized population. Is it I was hoping that it was going to be angry suburban moms together.
That's what I thought was going to happen. The soccer moms. That's what I thought was going to happen.
Together with African Americans and young adults. But that would be a pretty powerful coalition, but they're doing a great job with the propaganda. Um,
Well, our future is, there's I'm in New York City, so we already have kind of a vaccine passport already implemented. You download the app from NYS, New York State or New York City. The New York City also has one, and your vaccine, you have a digital card. So you type in your information, you get this digital card. When you click it, you get a QR code. They scan it at the door or at your corporation or at the school you're going to. And then they have the data and says, oh, you had the Johnson & Johnson on X day. It hasn't expired yet. And, you're okay. You can walk through the door. And you do this every day. Zip, zip, zip. That's what they're setting up here in New York. All right. And they already, they already have download the app and get your digital card. It is not mandatory to check at the gyms or at the restaurants or movie theaters until September 13th.
Yeah, but the irony is that it's telling you nothing because the vaccine isn't protective.
Right. No, but the thing is that it's talking about the individuals are capitulating and they're not really, rising up, asking questions. It's this. The vaccine passport and the social scoring. So it's not just the biological, it's the erosion of our civil liberties. And I think that this crisis, this COVID-19 crisis, is very reminiscent of what I remember with the curtailment of our civil liberties through the Patriot Act right after 9/11.
Yeah.
I see a lot of similarities going on here.
So this is why a lot of European intellectuals have been on fire now for a couple of months. They are very aware of the 30s in Germany.
Right.
All I can say is I feel like I'm somehow channeling John Galt. You laugh, okay?
Well, I've been saying that Atlas Shrugged. This seems like the playbook is Atlas Shrugged here.
And remember how that ends is John Galt gets tortured by the bureaucrats.
Well, I don't know. What do we do? What do we do? Dr. Malone, what do we do? Can we do anything?
This I also know. I've had a number of career setbacks throughout my life. And every time I've experienced that, my friends have sustained me, and I sometimes I use the metaphor. I'm sure we're not that far apart generationally. If I use the term mosh pit, you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You throw yourself out on the crowd, metaphorically, and they either catch you or they don't. And whether or not they catch you has a lot to do with how you behave before that point in time. And I find these social networks and the networks of people around me as I move within my community are what sustain me. And I've had hard times and good times. But as I have found myself forced into this position of because it's bedrock for me to not lie. It's like my mother screwed it into my head or something. And I try really hard to live by that and to be forthright and honest and plain speaking also. The outpouring of support I've had since I started, I received this microphone to speak, and I started being able to speak on behalf of other physicians and scientists, in addition to myself, has been amazing. I I received a donation out of the blue last weekend that was not trivial.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the points made by my old friend Stan Gromkowski in this Atlantic article, it's one of the closing comments, is that this is a straight quote. I think he says, Robert is fucking up his chance of getting a Nobel Prize by doing this. And they put it straight in the article. Okay, that's the way Stan is. Stan is that kind of a guy that just says things. Not always, he's, I won't go there. But he is very blunt about a lot of stuff. And so somehow this is a criticism of me. In theory, I am a candidate because of the RNA work back in the day. And I've been told by people that used to be on the committee that I am a candidate. And when I went into that Brett Weinstein podcast with Steve Kirsch, we sat around the table before, and Brett said, okay, we're about to do this. We were all scared silly. We all knew that there was going to be blowback from that conversation. We knew it beforehand, and it sure as heck was. And Brett said to me, is there anything in your background that they can get you with? Because they're going to come after you. And I said, no, I'm pretty much live a clean, straight life. And, I've been married for over 40 years to my high school sweetheart. And I don't do drugs because even if I wanted to, I can't because I work with the DOD. And it's just the way things are. And I don't drink because I have gout. And I live on a farm. And I live a pretty simple life. And I said, the one thing is that I know that I am a candidate for this prize right now. And what I'm about to do is probably the worst possible thing I could do.
The thing is what you're doing is what is real leadership. Real leadership is exactly what you're doing. It's doing the hard, going the hard path. It's easy to do the easy path, but we're in a crisis, an existential crisis, and we need leaders
to shut up and get along. And
say Fauci is perfect, and vaccine. Everyone take a vaccine. Everyone, even the ones that just received SARS-CoV-2
are perfect.
Right.
But I have children, and I have grandchildren, and I was taught all this stuff about the ethics and everything else that it's like the rules don't exist anymore. They just don't care. They do not care what the rules or the law are. This used to be the criticism of the Trump administration, but all I know is the things that I can see and touch, right? When CNN says stuff about me or my work or attributes it to somebody else, I know that. I know that that's fake news. I know that's truth because I've been there. And I've done enough high-profile stuff that I've seen how stuff gets spun. But I only know about the things that I can touch. But I can say to myself, okay, if that's what I'm experiencing, like early on I experienced when I was at Eris in business development, this Gates Foundation thing, I learned that the way that things work now in the press is that companies and organizations use ghostwriters, and then they get those pieces of journalism, quote unquote, placed under authors, quote unquote, or journalists from major publications that put their own name and byline on them, but they've been ghostwritten by the company hired guns. That was one of those, oh, you're not in Kansas anymore moments for me. And so I know these things that I've touched. And I know that I'm seeing a lot of rule breaking and law breaking. And there are no consequences. And there is no recourse. I mean, the people that haven't had to be trained in bioethics, which anybody that does clinical research has had that drummed into their brains. And the Helsinki Accords and all of that, Belmont Report, all that, Nuremberg Code.
Mm-hmm.
We all have to take that training, and I got it in spades multiple times. And it's written into federal law as the common rule. And I can look it up, and you can look it up, and you see there it is, and this is the rules. And we're all held to it rigorously by institutional review boards if we're doing any clinical research. And the Justice Department a couple weeks ago came out with a determination that the FDA is not does not have to comport with the common rule, and it doesn't apply to them or anything that they're doing, like the stuff that they're doing ostensibly. They're the ones that are operating the EUAs, and so therefore the common rule doesn't apply to EUAs, emergency use authorizations. Hence, it's okay to lie to us about the safety profile and withhold information and coerce us and all that kind of stuff. It's all okay. This is the Biden administration Justice Department making this determination. And so for me, I listen to this and like I said, all I know are the things that I can touch that are in my little space. But I see this behavior, and it gets, then I see things like these new initiatives that you and I just were talking about, and I can extrapolate from the little piece of the world that I know is true, from direct personal experience, and I can look at that's in this adjacent area, and I can say, looks like what I'm seeing here is actually applies out here. And they don't care anymore. And the one thing that I'll say in this whole conspiracy spectrum is that I think there's a whole lot of envy among major financial and political elite about China and about what the PRC leadership is able to do with their population. And I think they'd like some of that very much.
Absolutely. I've been stating that on my channel is that there's going to be a 21st century China, and it's going to be the model of governance in the United States. That
sure seems like where we're heading. And so I get, people are like, oh, Robert, you're such a bad guy because you've gone on Tucker Carlson. I mean, I had colleagues at the FDA just cut me an extra one because I was on Tucker Carlson. And then others, another person in that group at the FDA who's ex-East German, who grew up in East Germany, turned around and said, yeah, but what he said on Tucker was exactly what we've been saying for years, and there's never any change. So at least he said it. The big heresy, I don't know if you probably, this is inside baseball, my big heresy was that I went on Tucker and I said that the CDC database is a train wreck. At the time, Tucker put on this look like he had hemorrhoids or something. It wasn't what he was expecting me to say. I'm told that that's his standard face. I don't know, but I don't.
I call it the deer. I call it the deer in the headlights.
It was a deer in the headlights moment.
Yeah.
He was just like, huh?
Right.
And I didn't expect you to say that. But now we all accept it, right? We're all like, oh yeah, the CDC database is all screwed up. But a month and a half ago when I said that, it was a revolution. Everybody was like, Malone, how can you possibly say that to Tucker Carlson of anybody? And so I go on Glenn Beck and I talk to Glenn Beck in 3 separate shows, which apparently is never before happened. I enjoy talking to Glenn Beck. I mean, I wasn't going to talk about critical race theory with him. As he started to go there, I was like, no, I'm not going there, my friend.
I'll go anywhere. I'll go anywhere with a talk.
It doesn't matter with the me too, except for the problem is that you're not having stuff weaponized. And I am.
Yeah.
And I'm in a position where they want to shoot me dead. And so anything that I say can and will be used against me, not in the court of law, but in the court of public opinion as promoted by the mainstream media. And so I end up on War Room with Bannon. Like I said, I find Bannon a very interesting guy. He's very broad intellectually. Mm-hmm. He loves to go down conspiracy rabbit holes, but if that's a sin, then you're a little guilty too, perhaps. And so am I, only I try to keep it to myself, but it's not like my wife and I don't talk about it all the time. But I'm criticized because I go on conservative media. They're the only ones that want to talk about this stuff. They're the only ones that want to talk about Constitution and privacy and your rights as individuals and this whole information control and censorship. They're the ones that care. The other side just doesn't care.
Exactly, because if you were on CNN, the conversation would revert to, well, Susie and Johnny are going to get sick, so you have to take the vaccine. And Dr. Malone, whatever you're saying that prevents people from being fully vaccinated in the United States, you must be the enemy.
Data be damned. They don't care.
Yeah.
They don't care about the issues or the logic or the data. They care about the meme. And pushing the meme, pushing this dominant meme that has been pushed globally with profound success, and it's unthinking and reflexive, and it's frankly I think a strong case can be made that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has caused profound damage in public health through their laser focus on advancing vaccines at the expense of everything else.
Well, I think India would say that too. India is stating that their children have been harmed from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I don't even know if they're going to rename it, because they're divorced now. Is it just going to be the Gates Foundation? I don't know.
Or Bill is the savior of the world foundation. I don't know.
Right. But he also when he was doing the circuit, on the mainstream media, he had that kind of grin. You know what I mean? That Bill Gates grin. It's like, I know something, but I can't really tell you. Kind of grin. Yeah.
But let's not do to him what everybody's doing to me. But I think just from straight logic, the influence of a single individual on the global public health enterprise that is not trained, right, and is surrounded by sycophants, the damage that has been done has been profound. And it's our fault. We let this happen. We underfunded WHO. We allowed it to become corrupt. We stepped out during the last administration out of frustration, and I can understand. I so get the frustration with the WHO. And I could cite, we could have a whole nother podcast on how messed up the WHO is. But based on my personal experience, just my, this little world that I know when I visited there and dealt with them. But when we stepped out, we left a power vacuum. And that was filled by Bill and the People's Republic of China. And
kind of like stepping out of Afghanistan, and now we have the Taliban taking over.
Well, that's been inevitable. I mean, the writing has been on the wall for that thing for over a decade. But how long is the forever war going to happen? Why the Brits learned that lesson, then the Soviets learned that lesson, and then we learned that lesson. I mean, how many times do you hit yourself on the hand with a hammer?
The thing is my take on the Middle Eastern, fiasco right after 9/11. It was almost like the Vietnam that they wanted. Yeah.
It's almost. It's like, hello, didn't you learn anything?
Yeah. But it just doesn't seem like we fight wars like World War II. Where it's all in, get it done, get out. It's almost like precision warfare has made it drawn out and more expensive. And when you pull out, you eventually, lose all the gains that you had. There is something about absolute, complete destruction. And that's the last time we saw that was World War II.
So yeah, we did see it in spades, but boy, it left a mess. The new I was just having too much fun over there. In my world, it's all about SOCOM.
Yeah. This is what Prather is saying too.
The new world is SOCOM and drones. It's rapid strike, small group, highly flexible. get in and get out, and supported by electronic and drone and of course our friends in the Air Force. But that's the new reality is the big tank warfare thing. Problem is that asymmetric warfare after World War II, everybody figured out that symmetric warfare was just a bad idea. You're not going to take, Iraq figured that out, right? If we needed a good hard lesson as to what happens if you take on the Americans with tanks, Saddam learned that lesson, right? And everybody else was like, I think we're going to have to think this through again, except for the Chinese, who have got their new hypersonic tech, etc. And now the Russians are doing that stuff too. And that's that. You could take out a carrier battle group pretty quick now. So what are we going to do then? The big metal is susceptible to asymmetric strategies, and the rest of the world sees that they've got it. They have to adapt. It's, if you think it through, from my point of view, it's how we beat the British, right? We beat the British through asymmetric warfare, and everybody else figured it out. And by the way, part of the reason why we beat the British is because their tolerance of malaria was so poor, right? There was a big infectious disease component to why we won that war, and just like there's a big infectious disease component to why the Native American Indian population got decimated before we even stepped on the ground hardly. So the rest of the world figured out that asymmetric warfare is the only way you're going to take on big America, and we've had to adapt. I think that the big metal solutions don't work anymore because the enemy has adapted. We just got our pants beat off by the Taliban, and they are the classic example of the asymmetric force that's deeply embedded in the native population. We couldn't buy them off. We couldn't bomb them out. We couldn't do nothing. They just ground us down.
Yeah. Well, I mean, almost every major power has been stopped at the gates of Afghanistan.
That's what I said. Great Britain. How many times do we have to hit our thumb with a hammer before we learn that it's not a good idea? Right. So I don't know what to say about Afghanistan. It's kind of I remember, you probably do too. Maybe you served. It sounds like you did.
I didn't serve, but I had a lot of people in my family that has served, over the generations in the United States.
So at the outset, the folks that I was dealing with were like, oh, this is great. We're going to pave in all these roads, and there's all these enormous mineral resources, and we're just going to go in there and mine the hell out of Afghanistan, and we're going to make a ton of money. And look how that turned out. The place is no good for anything other than growing poppy, near as I can tell. And really hardcore fighters that are used to hostile climates. So now we're really off track. It's a different world now.
That's right.
And we've got to adapt to it. And if we think that the way we get ahead is by sacrificing what makes us Americans, then that is a Faustian bargain.
See,
if dear America, if you think that it's a good deal to sacrifice your personal liberties so that you can have cheap cars and plastic homes and stuff from Harbor Freight, then God bless you. I don't want to live there. I'll scoot to Portugal, or I've got my own version of Galt's Gulch right here in Virginia. My son is retreated back to West Virginia, and he's an avid climber and an IT guy, and a bunch of his buddies are talking about getting together and buying 1,000 acres and setting up a community. And there's a lot of talk that that's where things are going to go.
I have a
is,
lot of people talking like that. Yeah, I know
yeah.
a lot of people that are talking in that vein. Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's interesting that you're saying that from New York City.
Well, the thing is that even though I'm from New York City, they automatically assume that I'm let's say a Democrat. I'm a Republican, and but the thing is that I'm more of a centrist. I want balance. I don't want one extreme or the other. So I view myself as a centrist. But the 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 viewers of the channels that I have are very patriotic. They're usually pro-Republican, and they're moving to the idea of, you know what, maybe living off the grid is a better option. Self-reliance is a better option
I live
than
on a
a
50
handout
acre
from.
horse farm,
Yeah.
And it pays. I breed an extremely high-end rare horse called a Lusitano. My horses sell for $15,000 to $20,000 when they hit the ground as foals, and my wife and I are in our early 60s, and we're one neighbor is a cop who's a weapons specialist. He's got a shooting range. Um, and the other neighbor is quiet, keeps to himself, and leases us 25 acres. And the county that I live in has the same population that it had before World War II, and mostly nobody bugs us.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't get. It's cost me $50,000 to bring in fiber optic to my farm here. That's just the way things are. Even though it's only about half a mile away, there's a lot of the corporations have got their hooks into us in all kinds of ways. But I've got my little slice, and there's a good chance if somebody dropped a couple million on me tomorrow, I'd scoot over and live with my son and his little group of climber ex-hippies that are freedom lovers in West Virginia. No ifs, ands, or buts.
Mm-hmm.
They live right next to this great big new national park that's over there, and you can have a really nice house for $300,000 right on the lake. And there's a little bit of snow, and it's a little backwards. It's West Virginia.
In New York City, $300,000 would buy you literally a garbage can.
I know.
That's it, a garbage can.
Yeah. So for your buddies, so I grew up in Santa Barbara. I understand about equity refugees, and my folks made $1 million and got out of town when they sold their property. And they moved up the coast and built a nice place, and then that place sold for $1 million after they passed. But equity refugee is a good plan. It's wouldn't be the first wave, and there's a lot of people, young mothers and fathers. Both of our kids are homeschooled. They both make a stupid amount of money as computer scientists in their late 20s and mid 30s, have no debt, tons of money in the bank, homeschooled.
That's good. That's good. And that's becoming a theme that I'm starting to see, is that the performance of the homeschooled are far better than the ones that are going to public schools. Now, the question is homeschooled versus, let's say, private schooling. Even though going to private school can be very expensive. It's almost like more than a college education. But homeschooling seems to be a win for the student.
What we did with both of ours. So what I've seen, there's like two cohorts in the homeschooling. There's the religious based, and often those that are middle or upper middle class, highly educated parents. So it's kind of the latter group. My wife's a PhD that has been our cohort. And what I've observed is the homeschool kids, they haven't come through this industrialized, age stratified assembly line education process. And so they are much better at interacting with a broader cohort of of individuals, broader age range. They learn to interact with adults as adults and not so age stratified. And they paradoxically they seem to come out in many cases with better social skills. And then they get into the workplace, and the workplace isn't about how many A's you got in calculus. It's, can you get the job done, and can you work in teams with other people?
Right.
And I think that's part of why they're thriving. That's what I see in my kids, at least. Both of my kids are leaders, and that have good management skills. And that, I think, comes from a broad base. Now, particularly the younger one grew up on small farms, because that's what we do. So, yeah, if you're thinking about what your options are. I just came from California, which I haven't been there for 3 years, and it's where I grew up. And admittedly, I was with the Liberty Forum, so that's a select cohort. But I spent 3 days hanging out in Monterey, going whale watching and hiking around Carmel and stuff. And the people I were running into, there's a lot of derision about the masking and the mandates and what's going on in the government there. And I think it was pretty much a random walk. It wasn't that I was just selecting. Now, in the context of the Liberty Forum, those people are, conservative, libertarian oriented. I think that I really think the political dichotomy is no longer left versus right or Republican versus Democrat. I think it's collectivist versus individualist.
Yes, definitely.
I think that's the separation. And that is the axis around which this discussion is occurring about COVID, is collectivist versus individualist.
Mm-hmm. And see, my take is that if we go down the collectivist route, then it's just going to be a continual erosion of our civil liberties, and they're always going to state, well, it's better for the masses to follow this policy than the individual, right? It's utilitarianism versus egoism. I mean, if you want to go into the philosophical dimensions of this, egoism is individualism, right? Now, there's issues with egoism, but utilitarianism has a tendency to go down the socialistic route. And
then you get the Jacobus at the end of that road. At the end of that road is Jacobist hell, where you've got the truth police, right? Enforcing the rules. And we're there already in some sectors, in some discussion areas. And remember, I said we weren't going to go to critical race theory, please. But that's kind of what a lot of Californians, being a native and fitting in with that culture, a lot of those that I ran into that are native Californians are that are more like my wife and I are saying, no, this is not right.
See, my observation. See, I did some when I did some conferences. I was presenting some papers and on panels talking about economics and some issues with artificial intelligence and stuff like this. And I was working on a software that I called Poseidon. It was a three-dimensional graphing software of the market, and it was a predictive analysis. All right. So I was looking for funders. So I spent a lot of time in San Francisco trying to, talk to the VCs there. They were all focused on artificial intelligence for fintech, not necessarily a stripped down three-dimensional Bloomberg terminal. I was trying to kind of build a Bloomberg kind of model, business model. They didn't want to fund that. So, and then a lot of the papers were presented actually in Los Angeles. Well, my observation at UCLA, at these investment conferences in Los Angeles, and also that whole Singularity Institute crowd of the artificial intelligence guys in San Francisco, my conclusion was they're fake. I see a lot of fake people in California. Now that's coming from a New York, let's get it done. Let's get it done. Let's close the deal. Let's move forward.
And that what you're describing is a different cohort from the one that I'm describing. You're talking about these people that are just totally wrapped around the tech axle, and I'm talking about longstanding native middle class Californians.
Yeah, right.
And saying this place is going to hell. We've lived here all our lives. You're talking about this kind of new boom tech world that is what is distorting so many things. But I hear you that and the DoD is suffering from this too, in my opinion. This obsession with deep learning and machine learning as the one ring that will rule them all. And if you take that and marry it with utilitarianism, that is the road to hell for sure. That is kind of defining the CCP world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If we want self-determination, we can't go down that utilitarian route. We have to.
What I mean, think of what you just said: utilitarianism versus egoism. Ayn Rand, in my opinion, gets a lot of grief and is absolutely not a perfect philosopher. But the logic of Shrugged and Fountainhead, I got deeply embedded in my soul at a point in time, about 20 years ago, where I had one of these crises where I'd been laid off and I was just trying to make sense out of the world. And I'm still wondering whether I'm subconsciously channeling some of those narratives with the arc that I'm taking in my life. But I firmly believe that I want to live in a world. I can't live in a utilitarian collectivist world. I can't live in New York City. I can't live in San Francisco. I just can't. I have to.
There's two. New York City is two. There's two.
Fate.
New York City there's a split. There's the Wall Street crowd, and then there's where capitalism rules, crowd, and then there is the ultra liberal, that wants to control everything, in New York City. What gravitated me to New York City, because I was born and raised in Detroit. I was born in Michigan, just outside of Ann Arbor, and so I'm a Detroiter at heart, and I understand hard work, and manufacturing is an important component to the health of the country. You don't see that in New York. New York, the far majority of the people, it's like, well, if you can just move the manufacturing overseas and make a buck, then do it. And I'm going, you don't have the economic clustering that you need to have a healthy society.
So that's interesting. And then if we were going to map that over to Sand Hill Road, that's the world of fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
And I think that was what you were sensing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
there was a lot of people that were spinning. They were spinning an idea that just wasn't viable, but yet they could get money for it. Yet I had a working terminal that traded the market.
So you can appreciate I'm an innovator in this biotech space and have been my whole life. And the words that I've heard way too many times from VCs, and it's gotten to the point I didn't want to do another startup. I may be doing one now, but it's a different thing. Is the VC that talks to you 2 years later and they say, I wish I'd funded that idea. And you just want to shoot yourself, because all of this other chatter that you're talking about, all this fakery and we've got all the right words and we're stringing together in the right way, and so therefore it must be fundable. That's a flash in the pan. That's not sustainable. It's the ones that have an idea that is fundamentally going to be transformational, but by their very nature, they're hard to see at the time. If you're truly 3 to 5 years out, I can tell you from personal experience, it is wicked hard to get anybody to pay attention to what you're saying. I mean, the stuff that we've been saying on this, okay? One of the problems I've had all the way through this, you can look at my LinkedIn feed, all the way through this, I've been out, about 6 months ahead. And it is just painful because you're saying, look, like I say, I approach public health like a stockbroker. It sounds like you appreciate that metaphor. So for me, it's black swans, leading indicators, and risk mitigation. That's how public health ought to be run globally, full stop. And it's how I approach it. Because I have to plan, I have to get teams spun up and oriented so that they're going to be coming up with solutions that are timely. If I try to address today's problems, they're already being addressed for good or bad. I got to be addressing, the problems down the road. And
I did research. I did some research in autoimmune disorders just recently. And I was the animal model. It's a Lewis rat animal model, but we were inducing GBS, and then using the TAT protein from HIV, clade B, TAT protein to actually down-regulate the immune system.
Really?
And and it works. And the thing is that the hint of it was ones that had MS and HIV-1 ended up having less progression of MS. And then,
that was the signal that you were picking up.
Yes, that was the signal. And then, then you go, what is it? And it's the TAT that's down regulating through the HIV infection. Well, purify TAT, figure out which clade works the best, and then, do an animal
TAT
study.
TAT is a therapeutic. Wow.
Yeah, my research is in TAT as a therapeutic for autoimmune disorder. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So if you want to do a startup, just let me know.
Okay. After I get the next million, I'll give you a call. Until that time, I'm just gonna sock it away under my mattress.
But the thing is it's to your point. I was.
So what about expressing TAT from an mRNA product?
Well, maybe 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 that's the way to do it. I don't know. This was purified. It's just
if you want it funded, my friend.
Right. Anything with a messenger RNA. Messenger RNA.
Right now, the money on the table is bloody enormous. Okay, file that patent, my friend.
Okay.
I'm not pulling your leg. Okay, that's my gift to you.
Yeah, no, I definitely see that. I definitely see that I definitely see opportunity there from the research that we've done. But so in parting,
give me a call. I suffice to say there are deals in the works, and therapeutic targets are always needed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in parting, I think we've been going on for
a long time.
Yeah, 2.5 hours. But it's been a great conversation, and hopefully you enjoyed it, and that you can come back and we can continue on the conversation. We hit a lot of different topics. It doesn't have to be just. It doesn't have to be just on COVID. No. My audience stays the whole duration. That's the amazing thing about it. And the reason why is that when I premiere it, it allows them to chat live, and all these individuals are sharing their experience or their opinions on what we're talking about. And so us covering all these different subjects, even though it was over a 2.5 hour period, we broke it up naturally, just through our natural flow of conversation instead of commercials, put in and all this stuff. So people listen all the way through.
That's what blew my mind was 3 old men sitting around a table with the Dark Horse podcast, and it goes viral. There's something about podcasts that is different. And like I said at the start, this is pirate radio, what we're doing here.
Exactly.
And it is changing things. And I'm getting feedback, well, you should go on mainstream media. You should stop messing around with these little things. They don't have that much market penetration. They each have their own audience.
This is the future. This is the future.
They're puddles in the still water, and it goes.
Yeah. We are making waves, but not only that, this is kind of like the new, because we're not saturated with advertisements like Steve Bannon has.
Yep.
Or or CNN or whatever. So the whole conversation can be seen and heard, and it's a flow, and it almost seems as though we're all in the living room or at the kitchen table, and even our listeners feel that way. And I think they appreciate that. And I like those kinds of conversations. And I've been on, on shows that have been very segmented. Okay, for 2 minutes we talk here, then we do a commercial break, and then we have a 5-minute segment, and then we do another commercial break, and we do a 3-minute segment. You lose the flow, the natural flow.
Yeah, that's the problem with Bannon's platform. For all the it's good. The having to hawk pillows is just a little disruptive.
Right. So
it's been my pleasure. Daryl warned me that you were a big thinker kind of a guy, and that this is going to go wide and deep. So he was right.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, hopefully you enjoyed it, and and we can do it again. But before we go, for the ones that are listening and the ones that are going to be viewing the video, what's the best way to find you? Or participate in what you're publishing or informing the public?
Publishing and informing the public are different things. So you can, I use the same prefix for everything. So it's R.W. Malone, MD. So that's all in one word string. And so it's at R.W. Malone, MD for Twitter. There's apparently some shadow ones that people have put up. And you need to look for the one that's got well over 200,000 followers, and that'll be me. So, because apparently Twitter doesn't give out blue badges anymore. And we've set up a Gab account as a backup. I've also got a LinkedIn account that's easy to find. That's got about 7,000 followers on it. The website is rwmalonemd.com. And if you want to be on a newsletter, just go in there and click that you want to be on the newsletter and load in your email address. And we've got some newsletters in the pipeline that we need to blast out. We use MailChimp to do those direct mails. So please give us the real email address, because if we get too many wrong ones, then we get booted off for spamming. And then on the website, there's a info at rwmalonemd email address, and you can click there, and my wife goes through that. We're getting, as you probably are, just way too much email, and it's hard to filter that.
700 emails a day. Yeah. I mean, it's like, yeah.
So there's the answer. But the main feed, until they delete me, which hasn't happened so far, is Twitter. LinkedIn, I've been kicked off twice, and fortunately, Steve Kirsch put me in touch with the vice president at LinkedIn, who turns the account back on again. Not many people have that access, so I thank Steve for that. So until I'm deleted from Twitter, that's the main one.
Great. Well,
and we're probably going to go on other platforms too. I think we have to.
Yeah. I mean, I recommend you going on Brighteon, set up a Brighteon account, and then all these videos that you're getting from the different podcasters, publish them on your channel, and that way it helps to promote your website and your work. But thank you again for being on the channel and having this great conversation. But also thank you for being a leader. We need leaders during this crisis. We don't need followers. We need people that have original thoughts that are sane, that can sit down and talk through the argument, and we can have a conversation to figure out what's the best direction for our country. And I put you right into that category as a true leader. And thank you very much.
That's really kind. The hits from the likes of Atlantic are never fun, and it's the kind words from people like yourself, and I got a standing ovation. I'm not bragging. It was really touching. The other day from the Liberty Forum, and it was just people reaching out to me, afterwards coming up and giving me hugs and telling me their story, and that helps me keep my spirits up and keep trying to help. I'm a physician. I'm wired to try to help people. That's just how I am.
Yeah, I totally understand. I totally get it. And don't count out that Nobel Prize. All right.
Yep.
Think positive. Think positive.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, my wife is constantly saying, "There's no way you're ever going to get it. No way. It's not going to happen. Don't think about it."
The thing is that 6 months ago, 8 months ago, everyone thought that Cuomo was perfect, and that that he was untouchable. Well, he's resigning. So things can, we're in the middle of the battle. There's the fog of war. We're in the middle of this crisis, right? And once this, moves forward, the table can turn. And what the Atlantic was saying about it may spin into a positive for you.
I think that there's a good chance that our clinical trials are going to prove useful, and that when I heard today that we finally cleared, after almost 3 months of negotiations with the FDA, we finally got clearance to proceed. I got tears in my eyes. I think
it's a game changer. It's a game changer.
If we can have generic drugs that cost a couple of bucks, and I count ivermectin in that too now. I'm a convert. That can mitigate death and disease from this, then we've defanged this thing.
And and at the very beginning, we should have, any crisis, anyone that's been in battle or been you use what's in your toolbox. You don't say, well, I have this issue. I have a nail and I have a hammer, but I'm not gonna use the hammer.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
The choir. Yeah, I agree. It's I've heard the term psychopath being floated about from time to time, in terms of some people that made some of those decisions. But so I thank you for your counsel and for your sage advice and kindness, and let's hope. I'm not a religious person, but I find myself again and again saying, "From your lips to God's ears." I don't know what's all I can do is try to look forward through the fog of war, as you say, and it's what I've done my whole life, and I take solace not just in kind words from you and others, but in that I've gotten it right an awful lot more than I've gotten it wrong. And what I think I see is a lot of risk right now with the current strategies. Mm-hmm. What I'm perplexed about is how to change that, because being Cassandra is just no fun at all. And just like I was saying about the VCs that come to you 2 years later and say, I wish I'd funded you. That's just, there's no solace in that.
Right. Right. Exactly.
So
Exactly.
thanks for spending time and for sharing your
Yeah,
thoughts.
No problem. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording now here.
Recording stopped.